welcome everyone to the PCST webinar on science communication in the Arab world. Before I make my intro, my name is Tos Gascoigne and I am the moderator for tonight. Before I welcome everyone and explain what's going to happen today, I will ask our producer Saad Lotfi to explain how to access the simultaneous translation, and you can listen to the webinar in either English or translated into Arabic. So, Saad, please.
Maybe I'll explain it. So if you want to hear to us in English, you don't need to do anything. You just keep as it is. But if you want to hear to the simultaneous translation Arabic, what you should do is clicking on the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen, and this with globe icon, click on it and then it shows Arabic. لو عايزين تسمعوا الويبينار بالانجليزي زي ما احنا هنتكلم ان شاء الله، مش محتاجين تعملوا اي حاجه، لكن لو محتاجين ان انتم تسمعوها بالعربي، كل اللي عليكم ان في الشريط الموجود تحت في الشاشه هتلاقوا زرار اسمه interpretation، الايقونه بتاعته على شكل كره ارضيه، بتتكوا عليها وتختاروا Arabic اللغه العربيه من الاختيارات دهوت، وساعتها هتكونوا قادرين ان انتم تسمعوا الترجمه فوريه لكل اللي احنا بنقوله بالعربي.
Thank you. That was Mohammed, not Saad. But this is new territory for the PCST network. It's our first discussion on science communication in the Arab world, in the Arabic-speaking world, and the first also to offer simultaneous translation. And so, as Mohammed just explained, you can listen to it either in Arabic or in English, whichever you prefer. We have a panel of 4 speakers, and we'll get them to introduce themselves in a moment. Abdulaziz Alhegelan from Saudi Arabia, Bothaina Osama from Egypt, Rana Dajani, I hope will be joining us soon, from Jordan, and Mohamed Elsonbaty, who you just heard speak, from Egypt. And I do have to make special thanks to Mohammed because this was his idea, his conception, and he's been the inspiration behind it. And welcome to our producers and our translator. So Anna Claudia Napolte is one of the producers. Saad Lotfi is the local producer, and Dana Ayman is our translator. Dinah Ayman is the translator. The webinar is being recorded in both Arabic and in English, and you'll be able to listen to that via the PCST website after the event. So tonight we are discussing some practical aspects of science communication in the Arab League countries. Our speakers have special knowledge of Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Jordan, but also other countries as well. There will be an opportunity for us asking questions, and you could ask questions in either Arabic or in English by using the chat function on the screen. If they're in Arabic, Saad will be translating them into English for our audience. So let us begin the process. So, Mohamed Elsonbaty, we've heard from you already. What is your involvement in science communication from your perspective in Egypt?
So, hi everyone. I'm Mohamed Elsonbaty. I'm from Egypt, but based currently in Brussels, Belgium. I'm a freelance science journalist and trainer and science communication consultant. So, I studied pharmacy and then participated in film lab competition, decided to move my career into science communication. I worked in different roles as a science communicator and a science writer and journalist. And I studied then a master's degree in science communication, and then now I'm more interested into the professional development and building capacities in science communication. So I'm here today to give more insight about the situation of teaching and training in science communication and media in the Arab world.
Now, you also have an involvement with a special or Arabic discussion group, an organisation which deals with science communication across all Arab countries, and you do have a conference coming up, I think, in the next 3 weeks.
Yes, it will be. Yeah, so I'm one of the co-founders of the Arab Forum of Science, Media and Technology, المنتدى العربي للإعلام والتواصل العلمي. So it's a kind of a virtual event acting as a platform for networking, exchanging experiences between different stakeholders involved and interested in science communication and public engagement with science in the Arab world. We started last year our first event with the participation of more than 500 participants, more than 70 topics, more than 35 speakers, almost from all the 22 Arab world. And we discussed, like, it was like for our first time, so we discussed mainly like the basics of what we are doing, different stakeholders in science communication in the region. And now this year we will be here again. We will be from 26th to 28th of February, 3 days virtual event open to everyone. Anyone can register. It will be exclusively in Arabic, and our theme for this year is like foreseeing the future. Now we are focusing more on, okay, we discussed last year our status, the status quo of science communications Arab world, but what about the future? Where we are going to, the challenges, the opportunities, all of these that we are going to discuss, inshallah, in the forum at the end of February.
Thanks, Mohammed. So our second panelist is Bosseina Osama, also from Egypt, and also, I think, primarily a journalist. But what other hats do you wear, Osama?
Yes.
And what's your involvement in science communication?
Yeah, actually, I wear many hats. My first is working as the regional coordinator of SciDevNet for MENA region, Middle East and North Africa. The other hat is for SciComX, which is a startup company that we initiated more than a year ago, and I'm the content manager. I also work as a trainer for science journalism skills in our region. So these are the three hats that I wear. I started working as a science journalist maybe like more than 20 years ago. I think I started when there was like a very few number of science journalists in our region. We initiated in 2004 the Arab Science Journalists Association, and all the members were almost less than 200 in the whole region. These were the workers in this field at this time. I think we developed a very good background, so we are available now to deliver or to exchange experiences with the next generation of science journalists in the region, which actually is whom are now very active to initiate careers in this particular field, I think.
Okay, thank you very much, Bosseina. Now, our third panelist is Rana Dajani, and Rana is now based in Jordan. So, but you're a scientist, Rana, aren't you? You're not a journalist. So, what's your interest in science communication?
Well, thank you for having me in this group. And I think scientists have a very important role to play in science communication because they are the origin of that scientific evidence. So the better they are and the more well-versed they are in communicating the science, they make the job easier for the journalist, and they actually participate in part of the journalist's job. I always tell my students that you should be able to explain your science in a way that your grandmother could understand it and a 5-year-old can understand it. That means you're doing good science and you have a good grasp of it. So as a professor, I go beyond my lab and my classroom to make an effort to communicate with the wider society because I feel it's a responsibility. And this manifests in different ways, whether to influence policy and to make the government aware that they need a scientist and they need their advice so that they can create better policies, especially now with COVID, or for the wider community so that you raise awareness to science and so they accept scientific experiments and they support it and they advocate their governments to fund, and also to, when you raise awareness to science, everybody's life becomes better because you're using your mind, you're a critical thinker, and it impacts every part and sector of your life. So as a scientist, other than doing my science and publishing in peer-reviewed journals, I write a lot of op-eds and opinion pieces, which I try to publish not just in the particular scientific journals for the scientist community, but also in the general medium to allow other peoples to be engaged. And I write not just in English, but also in Arabic to make sure that I reach that community, because language is also a barrier. And also to communicate via talks and YouTube's videos, especially for issues that are controversial. So, for example, about evolution or using stem cells, or now the evolution of the virus, COVID-19, where did it come from? And I think in our part of the world and in all parts of the world, usually people look up to politicians and celebrities as inspiration, but I think scientists have a unique niche and position and opportunity to also become figures that people listen to, especially in the Arab world. People respect science. It comes from our ancient and old history of the golden age of discovery. So people are open and accepting to scientists and really listen to them.
Thanks very much, Rana. So our fourth panelist is Abdulaziz. Now, Abdulaziz, you must be one of the youngest directors of a science centre in the world, I would think. So what's your involvement in science communication, and how did you get to this position?
Thank you, Tas. I'm happy to be among the great panelists tonight. So my involvement in science communication comes through working in the science centers field, which is unfortunately within the MENA region, even though that some science centers in the Middle East and Arab world has been there for a couple or more than 2-3 decades. We still believe that this sector is still needs to get more, to develop more, because we have a minimal number of science centers in the region. So currently I'm the executive director of Mishkat Science Center in Saudi Arabia, which is again in Saudi. We currently have one up and running science center. There are some other science centers that have been either designed or even built, but yet struggling to operate. So it's kind of either funding issues or lack of expertise. In addition to that, I'm the president of board of NAMES, which is the North Africa and Middle East Science Centers Network. We're trying through that network to popularize science through the support of science centers or the current science centers or science centers to be. We believe that science centers, among other channels of science communication, could help people be more interested in science, as we believe that science normally is a word either scary to some people, let's say the young generation, or a bit some people, at least in Saudi Arabia, link it to boredom, and so because they're basing their evaluation to the science classes they're getting in their schools, which is normally a one-way communication kind of thing. So our aim to make science more appealing to the young generation.
Okay, now I'm interested in the role of government in science communication. Do the governments in the Arabic-speaking world, do they have as one of their missions the idea that they need a science literate public, that they need people to understand and appreciate science? And do they have programs to assist with this? Do they fund things like science centres? So perhaps, Mohammed, we might start with you on this one. What's your experience in this? What is the interest of government in having a science literate public?
Okay, I would speak from my experience within Egypt. Actually, I think the government the government has interest in science communication, a general interest in science communication. So, for example, we have some governmental bodies that fund many science communication programs. I have worked like in 3 or 4 governmental funded programs that aims to, for example, to go to schools at underserved communities, trying to make science show, it changed their perspective about science. And this came from that, like there was a study around 10 years ago in Egypt, showed that there is an imbalance of the ratio of the number of students who choose to study STEM fields at the university level. So they wanted to shift that. They wanted to generate more interest into science. So that was at one aspect. In another project, there was a recent interest in training non-specialized journalists in science journalism. So they funded another project that was executed by another NGO to train journalists to report and cover science, especially health sciences or related to COVID. So I would say, generally speaking, there is an interest. But from my point of view, one of the challenges that faces us here in Egypt, that we don't have a clear vision of what we want to achieve specifically. So we have many good projects, some funding to do some kind of small objectives, but I don't think there's like an overview or a vision or a strategy that, okay, we are here, we need to do 1, 2, 3, and we should move in this direction. And I think it's time for us in Egypt to try to develop a strategy dealing with communicating, a clear strategy, I would say, to communicate science to the wider society.
What do our other panelists think? Would anyone else like to buy into this question?
Yeah, maybe I can elaborate about the same situation in Egypt. I think the government has an interest, but again, as Mohammed said, there is no a clear strategy. For example, there is a huge project in Egypt started a few years ago. The knowledge is the Egyptian Knowledge Bank, and what they did actually, they dedicate a huge fund for translating the Scientific American. And do an Arabic version, and also actually generate some original pieces from the Arab region. The idea is the focus are the audience of these projects, and how can they are how to find the impact, or how to generate actual communication with more than one generation with different content. So this is the problem. They were like facing only one category of audiences. This is the problem. The other audiences categories are not there, are not clear how they will reach them. So there is a problem in the view. What they have the funds, they have the interest, but still they are not clear how to manage it to reach all the broad audiences in the region, or at least in Egypt. And I think that the same case is in other countries too. Let us listen to Dr. Rana. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you. Rana, please.
Yeah, no, thank you for this. I want to flip the question and say, I think in this time and age, it's the people who need to advocate the government to really take notice of science communication and make it part of the programming, part of the policy, part of every ministry, to raise that awareness. So sometimes the weight of that has to lie on the people. And in Jordan, there have been multiple efforts in that context, which we're very proud of. And these are actually networks of young people from the university who have come to realize the importance of scientific research and science communication, and have taken upon themselves to do campaigns and go around in awareness in different schools to talk about different issues. And then this has been picked up by, for example, the Royal Scientific Society in Jordan, that also works on advocacy and science communication and translating everything into Arabic. And I think this is how the government will start taking notice and realizing how important it is. And today with COVID, we've seen, for example, in the Ministry of Health, where science is part of the jargon, whether the government wants it or not, to explain the regulations and explain what the vaccine is and manifest it and say why it is compulsory and how it protects us. So I think but by virtue of COVID and the pandemic, science has become one of the priorities of, and science communication especially, of governments and ministries, so that they can help the economy. So in the end, I think this is the silver lining of COVID, that governments have to be involved. And I think we just want to call for more openness, more taking into consideration the language that's used, the terms that are used, so that we can use them across the Arab world because of the common language between us, so we can learn from each other in that sense. And if in Egypt they're doing good scientific communication, we can use that in Jordan and vice versa.
Governments, and I'll ask particularly Abdulaziz about this, are governments interested in science communication because they see potential economic benefits from having a science literate population, or are they more interested because they need to get greater acceptance for change from things in relation to perhaps climate change and greater acceptance of COVID? So what is the motivating force, do you think, Abdulaziz? Because your operation is right at the center of this.
Yes. So basically, I can't say that 10 years ago we did not have that interest in science, but it wasn't among the top 5 topics or top 5 topics to focus on from the government. But given that in early 2016, a new vision was launched, and it's a major transformation in the country. Many sectors either being enhanced or developed or even introduced. And I believe that during the past 5 years, we've seen a focus on science and technology in Saudi Arabia, in addition to education. As a country that has been depending for so long on a single source of its economy and revenue, which is oil. Now the country is, through that vision, is trying to diversify its economy. And even to add to this, we've been depending on non-Saudis or expats or international expertise in multiple areas. And that was a given thing. And I believe that no one was trying to change that. Recently, the government has started to launch initiatives that are focusing on human capacity building to develop the capacities of Saudis in multiple topics. I mean, a few years ago, almost all Saudis, when they get into college, they study business, and that was just the default option. And science, College of Science was something you settle on. If you couldn't get into the School of Medicine or Engineering, you would just accept to be part of the College of Science. Now the whole picture has changed. Now people know that it is kind of one of the options that you can choose from to be a scientist. Even within the country, authorities and commissions were launched. We have the Saudi Space Commission, we have the Saudi Data and Artificial Intelligence Authority. So the government has started to focus on these topics, in addition to starting to launch more science centers, trying to think more about how to promote science among the younger generation. And I believe now with the young generation, probably all over the world, having a better access to information, I think that we now need to do more effort to make Arabic scientific content available to them in their way. We cannot depend on the old way of having just releasing books. We need to develop videos, motion graphics, even animated movies or so. And within Mishkat, our science center, we produce bespoke animated movies, which is not documentary style. It's more of animated movie, family animated movie that has some scientific information embedded with it. What we are aiming for, to make science appealing to that generation, and it shouldn't be difficult. And everyone should feel that they can be scientists. Being a scientist isn't a difficult thing, isn't a bad thing. I believe personally, as Abdulaziz, I'm not talking about Mishkat in general. I believe going back in memory and trying to remember what I've seen, the representation of scientists in movies or whatever we can see, it's always that weird person it's never that a sane person that is smart and can add value to the community. It's always that person that looks weird, that is kind of nerd, that has no friends, no communication skills. So this is a big issue, and I think it's our role to change that and shift the paradigm of people to see science and being scientists as a good thing. And as Rana has mentioned, people are looking over to celebrities and politicians. Why not scientists? I mean, within the COVID.
Thanks very much for that. Look, I'll just interrupt because I wanted to go on to extend this question a bit and ask you all, and maybe start with Bathena on this one, and that is about job opportunities for people interested in science communication in your respective countries, and also training opportunities. Are there any facilities to train people in science communication, and where do the jobs lie? In science centres, or do they lie with research institutions, obviously with journalism? But where are the job opportunities, and is there any training? So let's start with Bathena first and then go to Mohammed.
Yeah, actually, in the last few years, particularly with the pandemic, the situation in the whole region changed, looking up for science journalists and even science communicators. There weren't, I have to admit that before this stage, there were few jobs that is available for science journalists or even science communicators. Media platforms weren't interested in hiring this kind of specialists. And so we were very few. But we can say that the pandemic was like a revealing point that changed the look that the community and of course the media organizations is looking for how they look for the science journalists or science communicators. They have found out in such shocking moment that there is no science communicators or science journalists to depend on in their staff. We had a very dramatic period in the start of the pandemic with misinformation, disinformation, many fake news. So I think after this particular drama, organizations and even governments started to look different for science communication jobs and started to find out how to train them, how to build capacity to find in such points will establish science journalists and science communicators to depend on to raise awareness between the public. So many trainings started in the last few years, in the last 2 years particularly. I have to say that before this, we all around the region, we had just one master degree in Algeria and in French, not in Arabic, for science communication. Now we still don't have a degree or a solid or concrete course for science communication in the Arab world, but we have a lot of small courses online and even offline in different countries or even regional trainings that happened in the region. Many organizations are looking more for hiring science journalists or science communicators. So I think it's the situation is flourishing, but still need more to work on to seize the moment of flourishing that is happening now to make it sustain and build a real field in the Arab world.
So, Mohammed, you're also involved in training as one of your activities, as well as journalism. So, how difficult has it been to establish training workshops in Egypt and perhaps in other countries that you're familiar with?
Yes, yeah, already as Buthaina already highlighted that we from the pandemic, but after within the pandemic, we have this booming in training in science journalism and the media, specifically science journalism and the media, not other aspects of science communication. And what helped in having this is that we don't have any kind of degrees in science journalism communication, even I mean as undergraduate level, even short university, small university course, like we have nothing like this, except for the one in French in Algeria. And then we have faced this need. But what happened on one of the challenges that from my point of view that usually organizations or international organizations who can fund such a projects when they have this kind of interest, so they start to bring like trainers from other countries, mainly from Europe, and then ask them to train people here in the Arab world about how to communicate science. And this can be a little bit challenging from my point of view. The whole context is already different. The language is different. The religion is different. The dynamics between the society, science, scientists, media, and different stakeholders is completely different. So it was a little bit difficult for me as an Arab to start a career in training in science journalism and communication, mainly because of this. And also, I need to highlight that the number of people from the Arab world who studied science communication journalism in an academic way, they are very few, really, really few. And all of them have studied already abroad. So I did a master's degree in Edinburgh, in Scotland. And I learned a lot. But when I came back, I found like the whole context is different and I need to deal with that. But at the same time, I believe since we already have like a lot of people who worked in the field for a very long time, for 2-3 decades, we can use our expertise to build up this. So I have participated in designing an undergraduate course in science communication, one of the Egyptian universities. Unfortunately, it was not published because of some like bureaucratic problems at that time. But I mean, there was an interest to have something like this. And also I have worked in training in informal science education, because also in Egypt, even before the pandemic, there was like a huge interest from the public in teaching from the parents to teach their children about science in an informal way. So we have science camps, science shows, and this kind of activities. And because we lack that big number of science centers or universities who have an outreach program to promote such an activities, a lot of the startups built or initiated by youth, Egyptian youth, to work in that sector. So you find there was a boom of startups for like university students who study science and fresh graduates who start their own small businesses of doing science activities for children. And here there was like, I would say, a big opportunity for training, because you are training these people who have scientific background on how to communicate science, especially to as very specific audiences, with like family audiences or school students, I mean, at younger ages. So I would say, yes, there is a challenges, but there is a huge opportunities for us to move on. And I can say, okay, we are on the right track. Not there yet, but we are on the right track.
Okay, so I would, before I want to ask Rana about this, because I know she has a very strong interest in education. But before I do that, Mohammed, where do you think the greatest opportunities are to get a job in science communication? Is it with government? Is it with a science centre? Is it with journalism? Where do you think the best opportunities are?
Honestly speaking, this can be a little bit difficult, because the number of people who work as a full-time science journalist or science communicator are not that many. I mean, even myself, I haven't been working as a full-time for a couple of years as a science communicator, or I didn't even work as a full-time science journalist in a dedicated organization. So the available opportunities are not that many, but I think there is a huge opportunity for freelancers. I have been working as a freelancer for almost 10 years. And now you can see with the new generations, they have more interest of working as a freelance. And now with this booming of these small startups, or even like having like this kind of YouTubers who produce scientific content. So you have like this content creation industry happening at informal level. You have like people who work as a freelance script writers, or like shooting science videos, or even like standing in front of the camera as a YouTuber. So I would say that for my point of view, and in Egypt, the biggest opportunities are mainly to work as a freelance, and you need to diversify your portfolio, because like you need to do to know how to do different stuff and try yourself doing different stuff, because the full-time opportunities are really rare.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective. I have to say that I was flown all the way from Australia to with a colleague, Jenny Metcalf, and we ran a training program at KAUS, the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, and it did seem a bit strange to me that they would fly us halfway across the world to talk to people there. So I understand your point about the different cultures and people coming in and when they don't fully understand the background. So Rana, education, but I'm interested too in your comments on what you see as the barriers to science communication in the Arabic world. And the ones that occurred to me were maybe the political will, a lack of funding that governments are willing or able to make to the process, maybe superstition. I'm not sure whether religion is a thing, but when we talked about this before, you identified education as the key issue. So perhaps you could talk about why you see lack of education as a barrier to science communication.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we have better education, people are more aware of the importance of science and how it plays a role in everyday things that they do, from turning on a faucet for water, or having to go and get some medicine. That science is woven into our lives, and therefore then we can start asking the critical questions, and we can foster the curiosity in the children as they grow up. And that raises their awareness to science, and that curiosity then is fostered to carry on into the realm of a job. Now, for example, in Jordan, where I teach at the university, at the Hashemite University, I have hundreds of students who take basic sciences, and usually, unfortunately, it's like rote memorization. So what we do is we open the opportunity for them to think of themselves beyond just basic science, where their job career would be a teacher or in academia, to think of other job careers. So introducing these little different projects and activities within the classroom, like, for example, to go around and look at the magazines and newspapers to find an erroneous piece of news about science written by a journalist who's not specialized in science. So my students go find that mistake, whether it's plagiarism or inaccuracy in translation, or it could have implications that are misleading. And then they write a letter to the editor. So they see, and then the editor responds and they explain why this was wrong. So this lets them perceive themselves, first of all, how their science helps them be responsible for the community, how communication is so important, all the aspects of science communication. And then they think, this is a career I can pursue, because it has an impact on society and there is a niche. We have a huge unemployment in the Arab world, and we have high education and low and youth. So we have all the ingredients which I see as the potential for an opportunity to create these jobs. And we don't have to, in this world today, we don't wait for governments to create jobs. It's entrepreneurship. The young people create their own jobs by finding the opportunity. And I think there's an opportunity for science journalism in this capacity because of all those reasons that I mentioned earlier. And therefore, those barriers like lack of education would be overcome because science becomes fun. But also I want to note a misconception by the world, and maybe more so by the West, that there is that religion is, and the majority in the Arab world are Islam, is a barrier to science communication or science in general. Because actually the region, the Arab region, has a very rich history in scientific discovery, and religion actually the Islamic religion asks people to think critically, to use their mind, to reflect, to be curious. This is mandatory as part if you're going to be follow your faith. And so in that sense, religion is not a barrier. It's lack of education to understand what is required and what isn't, and not to be taken advantage of by people. Those who use religion are people who take advantage of the ignorance of people. And therefore, education is always prime. And we, for example, at We Love Reading, we create children's stories about science to get the kids engaged early on, even as early as when they're 2 and 3 and 4 years old, to be engaged with science and to foster that curiosity, that critical thinking that will help them become better citizens, help and achieve the SDGs, and use science in everything we do.
So tell me about the useful networks and organizations that you have personally found helpful. And I think we might start with Abdulaziz here, because you're involved in one of these organizations. I think you're the president of it. So can you tell us about which organizations it covers and the sorts of discussions you have in terms of this?
So the NAMES network was launched more than 10 years ago, and it focuses on science centers, to be very specific, and trying to support science centers to either develop their programs and offerings or try to support science centers to be those countries, organizations in Arab world countries that are planning or hoping to develop science centers. Now, we cannot help them financially, but again, at least we can link them to experts within the region. As Mohammed mentioned, that our issue probably, at least in science centers, and that's one of the main reasons of failure of science centers in the Arab world, is that we copy or clone the experience of Western countries as is. So we copy it and have it, not taking in consideration the culture. So when we built Mishkat at first, we were thinking about how can we benefit from the expertise of the Western countries, yet localize that experience. So going back to NAMES as a network, we believe that we need to have more science centers, and we are currently rethinking the mandate of the network to be more to cover more science communication in general, to support science communication in general instead of just focusing on science centers, because we believe that this all are linked: science centers, science journalism, and scientists, as Rana mentioned, as the core of the whole thing. So this is our aim to do it more. We can see there is a lot of challenges facing science communication and science centers, to be more specifically, because it requires a bigger budget. We're talking about building a facility, and the issue is sometimes there's an interest, but it doesn't last long. So you might get the support of a government entity or so within one of the countries, and when you reach the middle of the project, they lose interest, and then you stop there and you start trying to look for fund to do more. And again, if we change our mandate and started to include focus on science communication in general, we will start working on trying to develop a suitable, tailored science communication training programs that is suitable for the Arab audiences. So I think this is what we need to focus on.
There's some really nice comments in the comments section, and let me mention one by John Chase, who talks about a science communication ecosystem, which I think is really the basis of the networks that we're talking about. But Zaina, let's hear about your networks. What have you found useful? Do you go internationally, or do you have national or pan-Arabic networks that you find most useful?
Actually, there's both. More than 15 years ago, we launched the Arab Science Journalists Association, as I said, and it had like 200 members. It's a bit, let's say, static. these days, but we have another event that is dealing with the community of science journalists and science communicators in the region. For example, I have co-founded with Saad Lotfi the Science Journalists Forum, which is a fully virtual event that gathers science journalists, particularly from the developing world, from all the globe. So we are trying to give the opportunity for science journalists and science communicators in the developing world to meet more professional science journalists in the developed world through a virtual platform that is easier, green, with very low cost, and of course don't have the problems of visas and things like this. So this was the idea. Another event that also we initiated and is as Mohammed mentioned at the start of this webinar, that we are having the Arab Forum for media and for science, media and communication late February, the last 3 days of February. So and also by this particular event, we are trying to focus more on the Arab speakers in the field of science communication and science journalism. So to try to exchange experiences, meet each other, and make a concrete society of science communication in the region by connecting everybody working in the field. So these are some of the organizations and even events that are gathering the workers in the field of science communication in the region.
So what sort of issues do you talk about? And Mohammed, when science journalists get together, and what are the interests the issues they discuss? And Mohammed, once you've answered this, Basaina, Mohammed, I would like to hear about the agendas that come up at the meeting you're having in about 3 weeks from now. So what do people want to discuss when they come together at these meetings? Because you have about 500 or 600 people you're expecting to come to this, aren't you? But let's hear from Basaina first about what do science journalists talk about when they're all in a room together?
I think particularly changing experiences around tools, around even their success stories. Their part of the event should be dedicated for capacity building for younger workers in the field. I think these are mostly the things. Also, even listening from researchers and scientists in particular issues and topics, so we can understand more about these particular new trends and breakthroughs, so we can easily cover this kind of stories. I think these are mostly the content of the programs of such events. Yeah.
Okay. So Mohammed, now, so what are the big topics? What are people interested in talking about when they come to your large-scale meeting?
So actually, the idea of the Arab Forum of Science, Media and Communication, when I started this discussion to have this forum with Buthaina and Saad, the idea that we found ourselves have been working in the field for a long time, wearing different hats, knowing different people from different countries in different aspects of science communication. But we found that they don't know each other. They are like isolated, scattered islands. So there are big community of science communicators in Egypt who have no idea about people in Saudi Arabia or in Morocco. And this is like big community of like people who are working in science centers and museums, but they are not very well connected with science journalists, for example. Of course, scientists who do science communication in different countries, and even like Arab-speaking scientists who live abroad. So we decided to make the forum the idea that let's bring all of these people together in just one place and let's see what will happen. That was like our idea for the first year. And I think it was amazing. I mean, you can see that like after the first event, the networking that happened between people from different disciplines, from different countries, and how they interacted with each other which helps in initiating new projects, like it's like transsectional projects and also kind of international projects. And you see, look, it works. So what we decided that we want to see this year, because like the theme was last year is about like thinking about that or discussing the challenges and exploring opportunities. So today we are more focusing about the future. So in 3 weeks, we'll have like different people from different disciplines, science, communication, and the media from Arab world, that they will speak about what they want to see happening. So we have some discussions between journalists about like how we are going to tackle covering climate change, for example, and other environmental issues, especially that Egypt will host the next COP conference in I think in this year, Sharm el-Sheikh. And also another thing that we want to highlight some of the careers in science communication that plays very important role, but usually we don't think that much about them. People who are working as press officers or communication officers in different scientific and organizations, as like NGOs or like UN agencies or universities. Like they have very important roles. They bring them together and start to have discussions. We are discussing that training, for example, and teaching opportunities in science communication and journalism. And also we think that we need to be like, okay, we want to make this forum an opportunity for people who are early career. So we provide them with some training tools. So we have a dedicated day for training for early career science journalists and science communicators to know more, to advance, to develop professionally. And at the same time, for like people who are very well established in the field and they are like in the management of this kind of disciplines, we provide them the opportunity of networking at high level networking, try to connect them with each other so that they can develop projects and collaboration opportunities together. That's I would say this is like our future on how we are going to shape the future of science, media, and the communication in the Arab world through our forum.
I think that networking aspect you make is a really important point. Because we are dealing with smart people here, smart people with ideas, and once you put them together into a room, a virtual room or a real room, suddenly magic can happen and they can discuss ideas and go from there. We do have a little time for questions if there are any questions, but I wanted to ask Rana about because she is a scientist, of course, a practicing scientist. And I wanted to ask you, Rana, how receptive are your colleagues to the idea that communication is an important part of their job? Do they believe this? Do they support it? Are they willing to devote the time into talking to journalists and talking to attending science centres and going to address public meetings?
That's a great question and very important. I think some of them lack the skills to speak publicly or to write because scientific writing is very different than science communication writing, and so they shy away and they're not very receptive to that kind of thing. For others, there's not enough scientific journalists to actually come and talk to them. I don't think. Usually they don't. Because there's a paucity of science journalists, so nobody comes and talks to them. And the only ones who come and talk would be a reporter from a newspaper who is looking for a sensational story, not for the scientific meat, as you know. And then the scientist becomes very, careful. Is this going to be made into a political issue and so on? So they're kind of intimidated. And therefore, I think lack also of training for them to know what to do and how to say it. Those are the major barriers. And maybe I want to add to this is that we're looking at science communication in Arabic, right? Because we want to reach the general public. And also most scientists are not used to translating their scientific knowledge, which is usually in English or another language, into Arabic. And that requires training in its own right to communicate and so on. So I think a combination of those are there. But I think bottom line, scientists love to share their story. They also love to be in the limelight. It's just that there's not enough science journalists coming across to talk to them about these issues. And I think what was mentioned is about creating the ecosystem, creating this to become trendy. And I see in COVID an opportunity, because scientists are the ones who are now kind of the celebrities. We see the Pfizer story with BioNTech, we see others. And so I think it's an opportunity for science journalists to take advantage of this, to start spinning these stories, or like Abdulaziz mentioned, to talk about role models from our own communities, right? Not about role models from the West, because people can't relate to them, or even the past, right? But to seek opportunities to talk about stories of scientists. That creates a sensational story, yet it is tied to a scientist. And that would hopefully encourage scientists to speak up more and to share to share their stories. And maybe, I mean, Mohamed Elsonbaty gave a wonderful workshop to the network of senior scientists, which I had, about how to communicate science for scientists in particular, to make it easier for them. And I think having more of those workshops for scientists would also help promote that.
Thanks. Now, we have a question from Manzoor Sumro from Pakistan, and his question is, how important is having science communication as part of the course of degree on science journalism? So how important is having science communication as part of the course of a science journalism degree? So should there be a communication aspect in a science journalism degree? Maybe Abdulaziz, would you have any comments to make on that one?
I believe probably Mohammed and Muthaina would be more suitable to answer such a question. But I believe it's important. After all, journalism is linked to communication, so probably there's there's a good connection between them, so that it has to be a part of it. But probably Mohammed and Muthaina can add and elaborate more.
Anyone else like to buy into this one?
Yeah, I think actually the science communication is the biggest umbrella that science journalism is lying under. So having the skills of science communication is very important for science journalists to know the basics of communicating science first before working in covering it for media.
So what sort of training Mohammed, do you, for instance, offer? And we've heard Rana just describe training workshops for senior scientists there, where she talked about trying to encourage scientists or to train them in speaking to other scientists. But what sort of workshops do you offer, and are you familiar with in the Arabic-speaking world?
I would say what I believe in, like that. Usually we need to, like, let's say, build the capacities on different levels. So you need to address scientists and researchers, help them how to speak to the public, how to communicate science to non-specialized audiences, and also how to speak with media. That's one of the things I'm offering. In the same time, you cannot do this without also telling journalists or media professionals how to cover science, how to report science, especially like if you are not familiar with how the scientific world works, the scientific publications, and the whole ecosystem of science and academia. This is very interesting. You need also to work on that side. So I'm also offering a training on reporting sciences for scientists and media professionals. And I think like we need to offer both training on both sides, for example. Also, I have worked in providing some training on how to communicate science to family audiences through informal science activities, because that was part of my previous job. So I think you need to like give all of this, and taking into consideration, as I mentioned earlier, that most of the job opportunities in the current situation needs you to have like this kind of diverse portfolio that you can do different things. So I would say it would be very important that you are trained to do different stuff. Like I would say, for example, when I went to study in the UK, there was a dedicated degree for science communication and a dedicated degree for science journalism. for example, because like the field is already very mature and the career paths are very clear for everyone. If you want to do this, you need to pursue that kind of study or that kind of study. But in the Arab world, as I mentioned, it's not the case. So I would say if we should have, of course, we should have a master's degree. It should be a mix of different aspects of science communication, media, and journalism, because this is how the job market works for now.
Just before I turn to Rana, we have a question from John Chase, and he's talking about the knowledge transfer between the English and Arabic speaking worlds. I suspect that quite often in the Western world that the contribution of Arabic science is sometimes overlooked. So, do you think this is a big issue? There should be a freer translation of ideas, not just from the Western world. I'm going to interpret John's question as being from the Western world to the Arabic world, but also the other way. So, Rana, I think you have some views on this.
Absolutely, that's a great question. I think, yes, because Arabic research, which is mostly not in the basic sciences and applied sciences, more in the social sciences and the humanities, it's written in Arabic and it's not translated into English. And so there's a huge gap. And unfortunately, we will have scientists, social scientists and humanities who come and study our part of the world and publish in English. So there becomes this schizophrenia. Those who publish in English don't read the Arabic, and those who publish in Arabic don't read the English, and then everything is lost in between. And therefore, yes, translation both ways would be helpful. But of course, huge efforts for translation are more require bigger funding and government initiatives to go forward. But that's a very valid point, which leads me to the original point I wanted to say, how we can boost creating programs for science communication and or science journalism, is we probably need to understand, as Mohammed said, the culture and the context to do research on this. So, we're scientists, we should always do research to understand the problem so we can create better solutions. So there hasn't been enough research on the ecosystem of science communication in the Arab world to understand what are the entry points, where are the weak points, what are the low-hanging fruits that we can get onto to go forward to create better programming, because we would be backed by data. When you go to a university and say, hey, we need this kind of program because the data says that this will make an influence on economy, for funding, or on awareness for raising better health, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, this is a call to do research on these topics by the social sciences or humanities to understand better the challenge.
Look, there are so many ideas coming out tonight, and there are some coming up in our chat program, which we simply don't have time to get to because we are coming to the end of our program. But I did want to ask you, as a final comment from each of you, and we'll start with Bathana on this one. So, if there was one initiative or one change that you would like to see in your area of science communication, what would that change be? Would it be more investment by government? Would it be more jobs for science communication people? Would it be better training facilities? What would the change that you make? What would it be? So Bathana first, but then we'll work around the panel, and this will be a final comment from everyone.
I think the main change that I would like to see in the future is to find media platforms that are willing to hire science journalists, particularly the public media, which is not specialized in science journalism, but it promotes their content for the whole people. So if they have a specialized science journalist in each and every media platform, so we can see a sustain for the moment that we are living now, with falling in love with science journalists in the last 2 years.
That's a nice way of finishing. So, Rana, what would be your choice for a change within this science communication ecosystem?
I would encourage I would encourage from a young age training our children and later at the university level to how to write and convey their ideas, to set up the stage for becoming better communicators, not just in science, but in every sector. I think there's a lack of skills in communication, and this build-up of writing skills and speaking skills and communicating skills will benefit across the board for all sectors. So to me, it is to start small. I mean, we don't have to change the whole system in once, but if we start small, each individual, each organization, slowly we will, turn the knob and move forward.
Okay, so more focus on communication skills in particular. And Abdulaziz, what would be your top of your wish list for changes in the science communication?
Probably I'll be building on what Rana has mentioned. To me, I believe that we need to encourage the younger generation to speak up and to ask questions. We need to stop the one-way communication, the lecturing style in education. It has to be more of a discussion style, and they need to never feel shy to ask the questions. This would help to come up with people having a better understanding of life and understanding where are we going. So this a two-way kind of communication will help a lot.
Okay, thank you. And Mohammed, I think it's entirely appropriate that you have the last word on this, given that this webinar was your inspiration and you have the big event coming up. So what would be the change that you would like to see?
For me, I would like to see the first master degree in Arabic language in science communication and media. I mean, when I started this career 10 years ago, it was very difficult to learn, to find your resources and stuff like that, and to proceed in your career. But now I believe that we have finally reached a critical mass of enough people that we need really to start working on having this kind of university course dedicated for science communication and journalism in Arabic language.
Look, I'd like to thank our panelists tonight. Today. It's been an inspirational event. We could have talked for hours, I think, on these issues, and I think it's been a wonderful discussion, and I hope it leads to fruitful discussions in all the various events that you've described tonight and within your networks. I would urge you to join the PCST discussion list. There's no charge for doing that, and to become involved in PCST activities. PCST is on an interesting journey itself, because it started off very much as a European-centered organisation, but since then we've held conferences, first of all in Asia, then South America, in North America, and Australasia as well. But this is our first venture in trying to spread across to a different cultural area for us, and that is into the Arabic-speaking world of North Africa and the Middle East. So it's been a great conversation for us. And I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to all the questions and points that people made, but to our speakers, thank you very much indeed. It's been great. Good night.
Thank you, Tos. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.